Why was the room suddenly silent? The radio had gone dead, leaving only the hiss of static, the kind that makes you realize how fragile connection is when someone's life depends on it. It was 03:47 hours. The Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Remington was half-lit, the kind of light that makes everyone look like ghosts, pale, drawn, unreal. Captain Lily Scott stood frozen, a coffee cup halfway to her lips, as the sound of chaos slowly bled into the stillness. "Commander Harrison is down. They're taking him." Then nothing. The silence hit harder than any explosion. Lily's fingers went cold around the cup. A dozen screens flickered across the room, satellite feeds, drone imagery, encrypted radio channels, but all of them told the same story. A team cut off, a commander captured, a nightmare unfolding in real time. She didn't move, not yet, because if she did, it would mean it was real. 2 minutes later, the follow-up transmission came through, fragmented, terrified, full of static and pain. "TOC, this is Trident 26 actual. Commander Harrison captured alive. Repeat, captured alive." Those two words tore through the operations center like a shockwave. Captured alive. In combat, death was brutal, but it was clean. Being taken alive, that was worse. It meant hours, maybe days of pain, interrogation, and humiliation. And for a man who carried the kind of classified information Commander Ryan Harrison did, it meant one thing: time was now the enemy. Lily didn't wait for orders. Her body had already decided. Her hand moved toward her tactical vest before the base commander even opened his mouth. She didn't hear half of what he said. Something about a full rescue operation, intelligence verification, satellite confirmation, the usual procedural dance of war. But procedures took time, and time was the one thing Ryan didn't have. She knew those mountains better than anyone on this base. She operated there for 8 months, recon, intel gathering, target mapping, and she'd seen what happened to captured soldiers in enemy hands. The enemy didn't waste time, and the man they had now wasn't just any soldier. He was her commander. And though she'd never said it aloud, not to him, not to anyone, he was the one person she couldn't lose. Ryan Harrison had earned his trident through the kind of pain that broke most men. He was steady, deliberate, the kind of leader who carried his team's ghosts without letting anyone see the weight. He'd led them through hell more than once. And through it all, he'd trusted her, not as just another intel officer behind a screen, but as someone who understood what they were fighting for. Sometimes he'd look at her across the operations tent during late-night briefings, tired eyes, quiet voice, and there'd be something in his gaze that lingered just a moment too long. Something human, something dangerous. Now that man was somewhere in those mountains, bound, beaten, possibly bleeding, and Lily knew exactly where they'd take him. She just couldn't say it out loud, not yet. The base erupted into motion. Officers shouting, screens switching to satellite modes, UAVs being redirected. But through the storm of commands, Lily stood still, not frozen this time, just thinking, calculating. The kind of silent focus that happens right before a decision that changes everything. She heard the plan forming, the cautious, methodical kind of operation that looked good in after-action reports. First, confirm the location. Then, assemble the quick reaction force. Request aerial support. Request permission. Wait 36 hours minimum before boots would hit the ground. 36 hours. She almost laughed. They didn't understand. Ryan wouldn't have 36 hours. Lily stayed through the briefing, nodding at the right times, silent the way professionals were supposed to be. But inside, a quiet war was raging between duty and something deeper, something dangerous. She knew the rules, knew the career-ending consequences of going rogue, but some part of her already knew she wasn't staying on this base tonight. When the meeting ended and the others scattered, she walked calmly to her quarters, no rush, no panic, just precision. The same kind she used when lining up a shot or analyzing a satellite feed. She opened her locker. One glance told her what she needed. Her M4 carbine suppressed with a night vision optic. 6 loaded magazines. Sidearm. Grenades, fragmentation, and smoke. Medical kit. Comms gear. Cash. And the intelligence file she'd been building for months. She packed quickly, like a rhythm she'd rehearsed in her head 1,000 times but never dared perform. Every piece of gear felt heavier tonight, not from weight, from meaning. Those files were her advantage, her map to the impossible. She knew where Khalid Rahman operated, the warlord who'd taken Harrison. She tracked his network for months, every hideout, every road, every shadow. She built a mental picture of his operation so detailed that she could walk through his compound blindfolded. There was only one facility near the ambush site capable of holding a high-value prisoner, a fortress hidden in the Zangle Valley, 15 kilometers of hostile terrain away. That's where he was. That's where she'd go. And no one was coming with her. At 05:30 hours, the base was waking up, generators humming, helicopters idling, briefing rooms filling with people who thought they still had time. Lily moved through the shadows along the perimeter fence, silent, deliberate. She found the drainage culvert, a weakness she'd mapped months ago and never reported. The kind of exit that existed for moments like this, when the line between duty and conscience blurred. She slipped through the steel grate and into the darkness. By the time anyone realized she was gone, she'd be too far into the mountains to recall. The terrain was merciless. Even for Afghanistan, these ridgelines were cruel, steep, jagged, indifferent, the kind of landscape that devoured the unprepared. But Lily moved like the ground knew her name. Slow, low, careful. Each breath measured. Each step planned. The pre-dawn air was cold, dry, and sharp enough to cut the lungs. Rocks shifted under her boots. Somewhere distant, a dog barked. Another answered. She didn't think about fear. Fear wasted energy. She thought about Ryan, the way he said her name when she briefed him, calm but curious, as if her words mattered more than the data. She thought about his hand on her shoulder once, after a mission that went wrong, a simple gesture, professional, but warm enough to leave her awake that night staring at the ceiling. Now that same man was in the hands of men who'd kill him on camera if it suited their cause. And she wasn't going to let that happen. 3 hours of hard movement brought her to an overlook. She lay prone behind a ridge, glassed the valley with her scope, and there it was, the compound. From a distance it looked almost peaceful. Mud brick walls, sun-baked and ancient, a place built for survival, not comfort. But she knew what was inside: guards, weapons, fear. Through the glass she counted 6 sentries on the walls, rotating every 2 hours. That matched her intel perfectly. Inside she guessed another dozen, maybe more. The main building in the center, that would be where they held prisoners. Thick walls, minimal exits. She watched, waited. Timing was everything. The heat built as the sun rose, turning the valley into a shimmering mirage. Guards leaned on rifles, bored and lazy. That was her window. She moved. Down through the rocks, silent as dust. The ground burned under her palms, but she ignored it. Pain was irrelevant, so was exhaustion. 200 meters from the wall. Then 150. Voices drifted toward her, laughter, the idle chatter of men who thought they were safe. She reached the wall, pressed against it. Listened. One guard maybe 10 meters away, talking on a phone, complaining about missing a wedding back home. His voice was casual, human. It almost made her hesitate. Almost. She pulled a flashbang, counted to 3. Pulled the pin. Tossed it. The explosion hit like thunder. Before the echoes faded, she was already climbing, boots finding holds, hands scraping against rough brick. She cleared the top, weapon ready. The guard below was down, stunned. 2 suppressed shots. Silence again. She moved like a shadow, quick, efficient, detached. Each decision pure instinct. Each action another breath borrowed from luck. More guards appeared, shouting in confusion. Lily stayed low, firing in short bursts. The suppressor coughed softly, muffled thunder in the chaos. Bodies fell, voices screamed, dust rose. She didn't look back. At the main building, she paused, pulse steady, breath calm. Pulled another flashbang. Kicked the door. Light exploded. She moved through the corridor, rifle up. 2 guards at the far end, 4 rounds, both down. Room by room, she cleared the building left, right, methodical, controlled. Until she reached the last door. Something in her chest tightened. She didn't know why, she just knew he was there. She kicked the door. Inside, a bare cell, 1 chair. Ryan Harrison tied to it, head slumped, face swollen but alive. 2 men stood over him, one holding a knife, the other laughing. Lily didn't hesitate. 2 shots, 2 bodies down. Ryan lifted his head, blinking against the dust and the impossible sight before him. "Captain Scott," he rasped, voice cracked, disbelieving. "What the hell, how?" "Explanations later," she said, cutting his restraints with her knife. "Can you move?" He nodded, wincing as he stood. His movements were slow, careful, one arm pressed against his ribs. "But we're not getting out the way you came in," he said, voice tight. "They'll have this place swarming." "I know," Lily replied. "That's why we're not." He gave her a look, half disbelief, half admiration. "You planned all this?" She managed a thin smile. Can it be both brilliant and insane? And for the first time in hours, she saw it. That flicker of something familiar in his eyes. "Hope. Stay behind me," she said, checking her rifle. "If I go down, you take the gun and keep moving." "If you go down," he said quietly, "we both go down." There wasn't time to argue. Outside, the shouting had begun, boots pounding, guns loading. The hunt was on. They slipped through the side corridor into the blinding daylight. Smoke still hung in the air. The warlord's men were swarming the courtyard, too many to count. But Lily's eyes were already fixed on the far wall, where a narrow tunnel cut through the stone. A drainage outlet, exactly where the satellite imagery said it would be. Their way out. They ran. Gunfire erupted behind them, sharp, cracking, relentless. Dust kicked at their heels. Lily fired back in bursts, covering Ryan as he stumbled through the tunnel. They crawled, scraped, breathed dirt. And then daylight. They tumbled out onto open ground, gasping. Free for now. But in the distance, voices shouted. The chase had begun. Lily looked back once, smoke rising from the compound, the echo of chaos behind them, and felt something strange in her chest. Not victory, not relief. Something quieter. Something that whispered, "This is only the beginning." How far could 2 people run on adrenaline alone? The mountains didn't care. They watched in silence as Lily Scott and Ryan Harrison stumbled through the jagged terrain, ghosts fleeing from a fire that refused to die. Every rock cut their boots, every breath scraped the throat. Behind them came the sound she dreaded most, echoes, shouts, engines starting. The hunt was real now. Lily adjusted her grip on the rifle, eyes scanning for movement. The sun was high, brutal, and the valley ahead looked endless. She could taste iron in her mouth, part blood, part fear, though she'd never admit either. Ryan moved beside her, slower than she liked. He was strong but hurt. Every few steps his hand pressed to his ribs. His face was pale beneath the dust. "You shouldn't have come alone," he muttered, voice ragged. "I didn't see anyone else volunteering," she said, not looking back. "That's not the point. It's the only one that mattered." He exhaled, half frustration, half surrender. Somewhere inside that silence was gratitude he couldn't voice. Not yet. They reached a narrow wash carved by ancient floods. Lily led him down into it. The steep walls offered cover from the watchtowers now behind them. The air down there was cooler, but heavy with tension. 15 kilometers, she whispered, checking the GPS strapped to her wrist. Then we're in friendly range. Ryan nodded, the motion small. 15 clicks feels like a lifetime. She glanced at him, the soldier in her doing calculations. The pace, his injuries, the time before the enemy regrouped. She knew the numbers didn't work, but emotion had never cared about math. They moved again, slow, steady. Every step forward was borrowed time. After an hour, the first helicopter passed overhead. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder. Lily froze, pulling Ryan against the rock face, blending into shadow. It wasn't one of theirs. She recognized the old Soviet rotor beat, Me-17, insurgent-toned, scavenged from another war. Its searchlights swept across the ridges, thin and white. Ryan's whisper brushed her ear. They're airborne already. They'll leapfrog ahead, she murmured. Set traps between us and the border. So what's the play? We disappear. He gave her a look that might have been a smile if it weren't so tired. You make that sound easy. It is, she said softly, until it is. The helicopter passed. They waited for the sound to fade before moving again, this time cutting west toward a line of jagged peaks. Every contour, every shadow she knew from months of intel analysis, except now, the map wasn't glowing on a screen. Now it was alive and merciless beneath her boots. At midday they stopped in a pocket of shade beneath a fractured ridge. Ryan sank down, back against the rock, breathing hard. Sweat carved lines through the dust on his face. Lily knelt beside him, scanned his side. The bruising was bad, purple and black spreading under the fabric. She tore a strip from her sleeve, wrapped it tight around his torso. He grimaced but didn't pull away. You always this gentle with your patients. She smirked, only the ones who ignore orders. His laugh was short but real, then quiet settled again. For a moment they weren't soldiers, just two people hiding from the world. You knew where to find me, he said finally. How? I study people the same way I study terrain, she replied. You all have patterns, I just followed yours. That's not an answer. She looked away, eyes tracing the horizon, because I didn't want to give one. There was truth there, raw, unpolished. He saw it but didn't press. Some truths needed to stay half-spoken until you were ready to survive them. When they moved again, the world had changed. Clouds gathered above the peaks, thick, dark, and rumbling with the promise of rain. Good for cover, bad for everything else. The storm broke just before dusk. Sheets of water fell, turning dust into mud, washing away their tracks. For once, the sky was on their side. They trudged through the downpour, boots sinking deep, uniforms soaked and heavy. The smell of wet earth filled the air. Remind me to thank the weather when we get back, Ryan said between breaths. Remind me we're getting back first, Lily replied. Lightning cracked across the valley, throwing their shadows onto the rocks. For an instant, she saw herself reflected in that flash, hair plastered to her face, eyes cold, determined, a stranger she barely recognized. The rain eased near midnight. They sheltered beneath an overhang, sharing the small heat from a single chemlight. The pale green glow painted them in ghost colors. Ryan's voice broke the quiet. You're not afraid, are you? She thought about it. Fear's part of the job, I just learned to move anyway. He nodded slowly. Back there in that room, when I saw you it didn't feel real. I thought maybe they were playing tricks. They weren't, she said, meeting his gaze. I don't leave people behind. Something passed between them, gratitude, respect, something that reached beyond the mission. Then his eyes softened. And if they'd killed you out there? Then at least one of us wouldn't be in that cell, she said quietly. I can live with that trade. He stared at her for a long time. I couldn't. Silence again, only the wind. She turned away, hiding the tremor in her breath. She couldn't afford emotion, not yet. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The world smelled clean again, like a cruel joke. They moved through the gray morning light, cutting across a ridge line that offered a narrow path toward their extraction zone. 5 kilometers remained, 5,000 meters of open exposure. Lily checked her GPS, then froze. A new sound. Engines close. She dragged Ryan down into the dirt just as 2 technical trucks crested the ridge behind them, pickup beds loaded with fighters, rifles bristling. The insurgents had found their trail before the storm washed it away. "They're flanking us," she whispered. "We need to move east now." They crawled through a gully, using boulders for cover. The vehicles stopped somewhere above, men shouting in Pashto. Ryan looked at her grim. "If they pin us here." "They won't," she said, cutting him off. But her eyes betrayed the math again. Too many variables, too few bullets. When the shouting grew distant, she risked a glance over the ridge. The fighters were spreading out, forming a line to sweep the valley. She made a decision. "We split." "No," Ryan said flatly. "They'll track 2 sets of prints faster than one. You draw them west, I loop back and call in extraction." He shook his head. "You think I'm letting you take them on alone again?" Her jaw clenched. "You're injured, Commander." "And you're outnumbered," he snapped. "We stay together." The word together hung in the air like a vow neither meant to make. Before she could answer, gunfire cracked from the ridge, short, controlled bursts. Bullets chewed into the rocks near them. Both dropped instinctively. "Move," she shouted, dragging him forward. They sprinted down the slope, slipping on wet stone, diving behind a cluster of boulders as rounds snapped past. Lily returned fire, 3-round bursts deliberate. 1 target dropped, 2 more ducked. Her magazine hit empty. She reloaded fast, hands steady despite the storm inside her chest. Ryan fired beside her with the pistol she'd given him, measured, precise. Even wounded, he was lethal. But for every enemy that fell, more voices answered. They were being closed in on from 2 sides. "Plan B?" he asked, breathless. "There isn't one," she said. Then quieter, "Not unless you count miracles." He gave a faint smile. "You always did have good timing." "Then pray it holds." The air split again, this time not from rifles but from rotor blades. They both looked up. 2 silhouettes against the clouds, closing fast. Ryan squinted. "That ours." She switched to her radio, heart hammering. "Viper 11, this is Captain Scott. Do you copy?" Static, then a voice she hadn't expected to hear again. "Copy, Captain. We've got your beacon. Hold position. 2 birds inbound." Relief hit her like collapse, but it didn't last. Because the enemy heard the same thing. The gunfire intensified, wild, desperate. Bullets shredded the ground around them. Lily pulled a smoke grenade from her vest, yanked the pin and tossed it toward the ridge. A wall of white bloomed, thick and choking. "Go," she shouted. "The clearing's 200 meters east." Ryan moved first, stumbling through the haze. She followed, firing blind into the smoke to keep heads down. They broke through into open ground, an uneven plateau marked by the blackened remains of an old shepherd's hut. The wind tore at the smoke. Lily looked skyward. The Blackhawks were closing in, miniguns spinning. But the enemy was still coming, shapes emerging through the thinning fog. Ryan raised his pistol. "We can hold them." "For 15 minutes," she said. "That's all we need." They took cover behind a low wall, shoulder to shoulder. The world shrank to muzzle flashes and heartbeats. She fired until her rifle clicked empty, then drew her sidearm. Ryan's voice came calm, resolute beside her. "If this goes bad." "It won't." "Lily." She met his eyes. "We didn't come this far to die tired." Then the sound returned, the deep roar of engines descending. The first helicopter appeared over the ridge, cannons blazing. The hillside erupted in fire and dust. Enemy fighters scattered, screams lost to the storm of steel. The second bird hovered low, its crew chief waving them in. Lily grabbed Ryan's arm, half dragging him towards salvation. They ran through smoke and rain and gunfire, every step heavier than the last. Hands reached down from the open door. She shoved Ryan up first, then climbed after him, her muscles screaming. The moment her boots cleared the deck, the helicopter lifted, tilting sharply away from the mountain. Below them, the valley burned. Lily collapsed against the cargo bay wall, gasping. Her rifle clattered to the floor. The adrenaline bled out all at once, leaving her shaking. Ryan sat across from her, medics already working on his side, but his eyes never left hers. Outside, the dawn broke over the peaks, washing the world in gold. Neither spoke, they didn't need to. Because sometimes victory isn't loud. It's the quiet realization that you made it out together. What happens after survival? No one ever talks about that part. The silence that comes when the gunfire fades, when the noise of war is replaced by the hum of helicopter rotors, and the weight of what it costs to still be breathing. Lily sat slumped against the cold metal wall of the Black Hawk as it cut through the dawn. The air inside smelled of fuel, blood, and sweat, a smell that meant they were still alive. Ryan lay on the floor beside her, half-conscious, his uniform dark with dried blood. A medic worked over him, murmuring things she didn't hear. Her ears still rang from the firefight. Her hands still trembled, not from fear but from the exhaustion of holding herself together for too long. The horizon bled red behind the mountains, the kind of sunrise that made the world look deceptively peaceful. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the vibration of the aircraft drown everything else out. She'd done it. Against every regulation, every command, every ounce of logic, she'd gone into enemy territory alone and brought him back. But now came the part that scared her most. What happens when the mission ends and the rules return? The base came into view 20 minutes later, forward operating base Remington, a patchwork of tents and steel in the middle of the desert. As the helicopter touched down, soldiers ran to the landing zone, drawn by the noise, by the rumor spreading faster than radio. She did it. She brought him back. Lily didn't move until the engines powered down. When she finally stepped onto the tarmac, the world tilted slightly beneath her feet. Every muscle ached. Every breath burned. The base commander was waiting. Colonel Mason. Square shoulders, lined face, eyes that could read a lie before it was spoken. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he doesn't yet know how to solve. "Captain Scott," he said, voice clipped, formal. "You violated multiple operational protocols, left this base without authorization, and executed an unsanctioned combat mission in hostile territory." Lily straightened, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Yes, sir." "You're aware that this is grounds for court-martial?" "Yes, sir." Behind them, medics loaded Ryan onto a stretcher. He turned his head toward her, bruised, bandaged, but awake, and for a second their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, something that didn't fit in any report. Colonel Mason followed her gaze. Then he exhaled. "You also saved the life of a SEAL commander, prevented the compromise of classified intelligence, and completed a mission that was still on my desk when you were already on your way back." Lily didn't answer. The colonel's voice softened slightly. "I don't know whether to promote you or charge you." "Sir, I'll accept whatever comes." He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "Get yourself checked out by medical. File your report. Then rest. We'll talk after I figure out how to explain this to higher command." She saluted, then turned toward the medical tent. The crowd parted for her, whispers following in her wake. Some called her insane. Others called her a hero, but none of that mattered. Inside, under the sterile lights, the medics patched her up with cuts, bruises, dehydration. They asked what happened. She gave short answers. The story was too big for words right now. When they finished, she sat alone on the edge of the cot, staring at her hands. They still shook faintly, not from adrenaline this time, but from everything that had caught up all at once. The silence was unbearable. She almost missed the chaos of the mountains, at least there. The noise matched what she felt inside. Later, when she walked back to her quarters, she found her gear piled neatly on her bunk, rifle cleaned, uniform folded, everything just as it had been before she'd left. It looked like she'd never gone anywhere. But she knew she wasn't the same. Outside, the desert wind carried the smell of diesel and dust. She stood by the window for a long time, watching helicopters rise and fall, feeling the distance between herself and the world that didn't know what she'd done. They'd call it bravery. They'd call it reckless. They'd write it into reports that stripped it of emotion. But what she'd done wasn't about orders or medals. It was about something simpler, something no one could put in words. She'd gone because she couldn't live with herself if she hadn't. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes, the compound, the flashbang, the faces of the men she'd killed, Ryan's voice calling her name in that smoke. When the dawn came again, she was still awake. 3 days later, word came down. Commander Harrison was stable, recovering in the medical wing. Against all odds, he'd survived. She waited until the evening, then made her way there. The corridors were quiet. The air smelled of antiseptic and metal. She found his room at the far end, the door slightly open, the light dim. He was sitting up, pale but alert, reading a report. Bandages wrapped his ribs and arm, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Captain Scott," he said when he saw her, voice still hoarse but carrying warmth. "Come to check if your rescue worked." Something like that. She pulled a chair beside the bed. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy with everything that hadn't been said in months. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I got captured, beaten, and dragged 15 kilometers through hell," he said dryly. "But alive, thanks to you." She looked down, a faint smile ghosting her lips. "You'd have done the same." He shook his head slowly. "No, I wouldn't have been allowed to. You broke every rule in the book, Lily." "I know." And yet, he paused, studying her. "You came anyway." "I couldn't not." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She looked away, cursing herself for the softness in her voice. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You risked everything, your career, your life." She exhaled, the confession low. "Leaving you there wasn't an option, not for me." Something in his expression shifted, the soldier giving way to the man underneath. He reached out, his fingers brushing hers, tentative but certain. "When we get back to the States," he said quietly, "you and I are going to have a conversation, off duty, no uniforms, no ranks." She hesitated, then nodded. "Deal." "Good," he said, leaning back, closing his eyes briefly. "Because I owe you dinner, a real one, somewhere with tables and candles instead of sandbags." She smiled, soft and small, but it reached her eyes. "I'll hold you to that, Commander." "Ryan," he corrected gently. "When we're off duty, it's Ryan." "Then it's Lily," she replied. The sound of those names, unranked, unguarded, felt almost fragile in the air. She left the room soon after, not trusting herself to stay longer. Outside, the night was cool, and for the first time in days, she let herself breathe without armor. Word of her mission had spread across the base and beyond. Some called her reckless, others called her legendary. The colonel still hadn't decided whether to commend or court-martial her, but deep down, she knew that didn't matter. Because the truth of what she'd done wasn't for reports or headlines. It was between her and the man she'd walked into hell for. And though she didn't know what the future held, punishment, promotion, or something in between, she knew one thing for certain. she'd do it all again. Sometimes the hardest part of war isn't the fight. It's the quiet afterward when you're forced to face who you became while surviving it. Lily Scott had faced her fear, her orders, her own limits, and broken all three. But in that defiance she'd found something rare, something worth the risk. Not heroism, not glory, something quieter. A simple, stubborn truth. When someone you love is in danger, you go. And in that truth, she finally understood the kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't demand recognition, doesn't wear medals. It just acts. Would you like me to continue with part 4, approximately 500 words? The aftermath of the mission back in the U.S., the medal ceremony, the reflection on what it truly cost her, and how her connection with Ryan deepens through moral reflection and emotional realism. You said 4. ChatGPT said. Beautiful. Here's part 4, approximately 600 words, written in the same cinematic, emotional, voiceover-ready style. This part follows their return home, the quiet aftermath, the medal ceremony, and the inner reflection on what war changes and what it can't. What does redemption look like in uniform? Sometimes it's a medal pinned on a chest under bright lights. Other times it's silence, a long breath in a quiet room when no one's watching. 2 months after the mission, the war was still happening somewhere else. But for Captain Lily Scott, the noise had changed. Washington felt wrong after the desert. The air was too clean, the streets too quiet. She could still feel the mountains in her bones, the weight of her rifle, the heat on her skin, the sound of her own breathing when she was the only heartbeat left in hostile territory. Now there were mirrors and microphones, cameras and speeches. The Pentagon auditorium was full that morning, rows of uniforms, ribbons catching the light, the hum of whispered ceremony. Lily stood at attention in her dress blues, her posture perfect, her eyes steady. They called her name. The applause rose. She stepped forward. A general she'd never met before smiled for the cameras and pinned a silver star to her uniform. "Captain Lily Scott," he said, his voice amplified, "for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, demonstrating exceptional courage by conducting a solo infiltration and extraction operation to rescue a captured teammate, displaying valor and tactical expertise that saved American lives and prevented intelligence compromise." Flashbulbs went off, cameras clicked. But all Lily could hear was the sound of her own pulse, slow, heavy, distant. The medal was cool against her chest. It felt like it belonged to someone else. Applause again, handshakes, formal words. Then it was over. She walked off stage into the sea of uniforms, feeling both visible and invisible at once. Ryan was waiting at the edge of the crowd. He'd been cleared for duty again, the scars on his face faint reminders of what they'd both survived. He looked strong, calm, every inch the SEAL commander again. But when his eyes met hers, something unspoken passed between them, a language made of shared silence. He smiled slightly. "You clean up well, Captain." She smirked. "Don't get used to it." They left the ceremony together, slipping out a side door before the reporters could follow. Outside, the air smelled of rain and asphalt. The world felt real again. For a while they just walked. No words, just the sound of shoes on wet pavement. Finally, Ryan said quietly, "You didn't come to the debrief last week." Didn't feel like listening to people dissect something they weren't there for. He nodded. "They'll never really understand." "They don't need to." He looked at her then, not as a superior officer, not as a teammate, but as someone who owed her his life. "You still think it wasn't a big deal?" Lily stopped walking. The city lights flickered across her eyes. "It was the only thing I could do," she said softly. "That doesn't make it right, just necessary." Ryan studied her for a moment. "Sometimes necessary is right." She didn't answer. They reached the edge of a small park, trees dripping with rain, a few benches half-lit by street lamps. It was quiet, almost peaceful. Ryan gestured toward one. "Sit with me." She hesitated, then nodded. They sat side by side, watching the faint mist rising from the grass. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Ryan said, "You know, after they grabbed me, I thought about a lot of things, regrets mostly, stuff I never said." Lily glanced at him. "Like what?" "Like how you were the reason half our missions didn't end in body bags. Or how I used to watch you in the briefing room, trying to figure out how someone could be that calm under pressure." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't calm, just pretending better than most." He looked at her, really looked. "You were brave." Brave and reckless looked the same from a distance. "Maybe," he said, "but bravery's what gets people home." They sat in silence again, the rain whispering around them. Finally, Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about what comes next." "Career-wise or life-wise?" she asked, half smiling. "Both," he admitted. "They're offering me a staff position stateside. I'm thinking of taking it." She raised an eyebrow. "You behind a desk?" He shrugged. "After what happened, I'm realizing maybe there's more to life than how many missions you survive." She looked away, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "War changes that calculus, doesn't it? You start counting differently." "How about you?" he asked. "I haven't decided," she said. "They offered me reassignment to Intel Command. Safer, cleaner, but I don't know if I belong anywhere that quiet." He smiled. "You'll figure it out, you always do." She didn't reply. She was thinking about the silence that came after missions, how no medal or report could fill it, how even victory had ghosts. After a while, Ryan turned to her. "That dinner we talked about, I wasn't joking." She met his gaze. "I know." He grinned. "Tomorrow night, 1900 hours, that Italian place off base you mentioned once." Lily hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because saying yes felt like crossing an invisible line. But maybe some lines were meant to be crossed. "All right," she said softly, "it's a date." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "See you tomorrow, Captain." "Ryan," she corrected, smiling this time. He laughed quietly. "Right, Lily." When he walked away, she stood there for a long time, the sound of his footsteps fading into the hum of the city. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel something lighter than duty. Hope. That night she placed the medal on her desk and just stared at it. The silver caught the lamplight, cold, perfect, distant. It didn't feel like hers, not really. The real reward was something no one could pin to her chest. It was the fact that when it mattered most, she hadn't hesitated. That she'd done the right thing, not the easy thing. She thought about all the nights she'd doubted herself, all the moments she'd nearly broken. And then she thought about that single moment when she'd stood outside the compound wall, heart pounding, hands steady, and realized she was enough. That was the real victory. And maybe that was the truth of courage. It doesn't shout. It doesn't wait for permission. It just moves quietly in the direction of what's right. The next evening came soft and gold. Lily wore civilian clothes for the first time in months, jeans, a light jacket, her hair down. When she saw Ryan waiting outside the restaurant, she almost didn't recognize him either. No uniform, no weapons, just a man who'd survived. He smiled when he saw her, the kind of smile that said, "We made it." Dinner was easy, quiet laughter, shared stories, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Halfway through, Ryan set down his glass. "You know," he said, "they're calling your mission a legend already. The Lone Operator Rescue. You've got admirals quoting your report." She rolled her eyes. "That's the problem with legends, they forget the fear." He nodded, thoughtful. "Maybe, but sometimes legends remind people what's still possible." She looked at him then, and for the first time since that night in the desert, her shoulders eased. You really think what we did matters?" He smiled. "It mattered to me." The words hung there, simple and unadorned, and somehow that was enough. When the night ended, they walked together down the quiet street. The world felt softer, the war further away. At the corner, Ryan stopped. "You know, when you kicked down that door, I thought I was hallucinating." She laughed softly. "You weren't the first man to think that." "Maybe not," he said, stepping closer, voice lower now. "But I was the first who knew you'd actually pull it off." She smiled. "Confidence suits you." "So does courage," he said. "You wear it well." They stood there for a moment longer, the streetlight painting them in gold. Then he said quietly, "Thank you, Lily, for coming for me." Her eyes softened. "I told you leaving you wasn't an option." And maybe that was all that needed to be said. Because sometimes, the most powerful promises aren't spoken at all, they're lived. How do you come home from a place that never leaves you? It had been 6 weeks since the ceremony, and the world had already moved on. New missions, new headlines, new heroes. But for Lily Scott, time hadn't moved at all. It was stuck somewhere between the echo of gunfire and the sound of Ryan's voice in the dark, telling her to keep moving. She transferred temporarily to the Defense Intelligence Division, a desk, a badge, and a view of the Potomac instead of mountains and gunmetal skis. On paper, it was a promotion. In reality, it felt like exile. Every morning was the same. Coffee gone cold before she finished it. Reports stacked in neat rows. Analysts discussing insurgent patterns like they were just lines on a graph. Sometimes she'd catch herself staring at the terrain maps, fingers tracing the valleys where she'd nearly died, remembering the sound of gravel under her boots, the smell of rain on dust. That was the thing about survival. It didn't end when the fighting stopped. And she was still fighting. Ryan called occasionally, check-ins, updates, small talk that skirted around everything real. He was stationed at Coronado now, training new operators, the kind of assignment given to heroes who'd earned a slower pace. His messages were short, efficient, familiar. But between every word was something unspoken. He wanted to see her again. She wanted to say yes. Neither had found the courage to bridge the distance. Until the letter arrived. It came through official channels, black envelope, no insignia, her name typed neatly in the corner. Inside was a single folded page. Classified, eyes only, CAPT, LSCOTT. Request for consultation. Emerging network, suspected operations in Zangul region. Source, intercepted transmissions referencing Trident Ghost. Immediate analysis requested. Zangul. The name alone made her pulse spike. That valley had been her hell and her miracle. The thought that the enemy was regrouping there meant one thing: unfinished business. She spent the next 48 hours buried in data, signal intercepts, movement logs, satellite imagery. Piece by piece, the pattern emerged. Same terrain, same warlord network, same tactics. But one phrase kept repeating across the transmissions. Trident Ghost. At first she thought it was coincidence, old chatter resurfacing. But then the translations came through and her stomach turned cold. They weren't referencing Ryan's unit. They were referencing him. The men she'd killed, the compound she'd burned, they hadn't been forgotten. Someone had survived, someone who wanted revenge. And they had a name. Harrison. That night she called him. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm but cautious. "Lily, it's late." "I know, I wouldn't call unless it mattered." Silence, then the sound of him sitting up. "What's going on?" "They're talking about you," she said quietly. "Zangul's active again. Intercepts mention the Trident Ghost. That's you, Ryan. They think you're still their unfinished war." For a moment neither spoke, then his voice came lower, steadier. "You sure?" "I don't guess about this kind of thing." He sighed, the kind of sound that carried more memory than breath. They won't stop. You embarrassed them. We did. She closed her eyes. They're not done trying. Another pause. Then maybe it's time we finish it. Lily leaned back in her chair, staring at the rain against the window. You're not suggesting what I think you are. You know I am. Ryan. You came for me once, he said quietly. Now let me come for you, for us. She wanted to argue, but something in his voice, that calm, immovable certainty, told her it was already decided. By the end of the week, she was on a flight to California. Coronado was sunlit, ocean-washed, the air heavy with salt and jet fuel. It felt almost obscene, too bright, too easy. But when she saw Ryan waiting at the terminal, uniform crisp, eyes warm, she felt the familiar shift inside her chest. He smiled as she approached. You made it. I wasn't going to let you walk into this alone. Old habits, he said, a trace of humor softening the edge of worry in his eyes. They spent the next 2 days in a secure operations room, reviewing maps, listening to intercepted audio, piecing together a threat that felt both new and painfully familiar. Zangel was active again, training camps rebuilt, new leaders rising. But what struck Lily most was the precision of their information. They knew names, locations, call signs. Someone was feeding them intel. When she said it out loud, Ryan nodded grimly. Leak inside the region. Maybe someone who saw the mission aftermath and decided to cash in. Or someone who wants to finish what Raman started, she added. They worked through the night, just like before, quiet, efficient, in sync without speaking. But under that rhythm was a pulse neither could ignore. Every time their hands brushed over a file, every time their eyes met across the table, the silence felt charged. At one point, Ryan leaned back, watching her. You ever think about it? About what? Us. She hesitated. Sometimes. Just sometimes. She smiled faintly. More when I'm supposed to be sleeping. He laughed, soft, tired, honest. Same. For a moment, they weren't soldiers. Just two people trying to figure out what came next. Then the alarm on the screen beeped, a new intercept. Lily leaned forward, reading. Her pulse quickened. Transmission source, Northern Zangel. Translation, the woman returns, the one who walks alone, the one who took him back. Her blood ran cold. They're watching us, she whispered. Ryan frowned. How? She typed rapidly, tracing the signal bounce. It wasn't coming from Afghanistan. It was bouncing through it, relayed from somewhere much closer. She turned to him. Ryan, the signal's domestic. The realization hit both at once. Someone inside the States was helping them. He stood, all calm, gone from his voice now. We need to alert command. Not yet, she said. If we move too fast, they'll vanish again. Let me trace it properly. You're not going after this alone. She looked at him, the same look she'd given before she crossed that desert. Then you'd better keep up. For a long moment, he just stared at her, half in awe, half in resignation. Then he nodded. Fine, he said, but this time we walk into hell together. Hours later, they were on the move again, not a battlefield this time, but the quiet war no one saw. Airports, terminals, safe houses, the kind of world where battles are fought in silence and the weapon is patience. As they tracked the signal west through encrypted networks and foreign relays, Lily felt the old rhythm returning, the clarity, the focus. The world narrowed again to maps and instincts. But this time, something was different. Because every step she took, every risk she measured wasn't just for duty. It was for him, for what they'd built in the space between missions and scars. When they finally found the source, an abandoned cargo hub outside San Diego, the sun was already sinking. The building loomed empty, all corrugated metal and silence. Ryan checked his weapon. You ready? Lily's hand brushed his, steady and sure. Always. They moved as one, quiet, practiced, a dance they both remembered. Inside, the air was still. Rows of shipping containers stretched into darkness. Somewhere, a radio hissed faintly, a ghost of a signal repeating the same phrase. "The one who walks alone." They followed the sound until it stopped. In the far corner, a single monitor glowed. Text scrolled across the screen, coordinates, dates, names. And then a message. "Welcome back, Captain Scott." Lily froze. The screen flickered once, then went dark. Ryan exhaled slowly. They knew we'd come. Then they're still watching. Her eyes scanned the room, every shadow, every corner. The past and present had folded together again. The war she thought she'd left was still here, waiting. Ryan touched her shoulder. "We'll find them." She nodded, though her voice was quieter now. "I know, but this time it's not just about fighting them." He frowned. "Then what is it?" She looked toward the open doorway, where the fading light spilled across the floor like fire. "It's about finishing what started that night," she said softly. "Not for revenge, for peace." He followed her gaze. "You think peace is possible for people like us?" She thought about it, then smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but we can try." Outside, the last light of the day bled into dusk. And as they walked away from the building, side by side, unspoken promise between them, the war behind them whispered its last threat into the wind. But Lily didn't turn back. Some ghosts don't vanish. They just lose their power when you stop running from them. And sometimes, the bravest thing a soldier can do isn't fight again. It's walk forward knowing that peace, even if temporary, is still worth chasing. Because courage doesn't always carry a rifle. Sometimes it carries memory. Sometimes it carries love. And sometimes it simply keeps walking toward whatever comes next. What if the enemy isn't across the ocean, but sitting behind the same flag? The drive back from the cargo hub was silent. Rain streaked across the windshield, turning the city lights into blurred rivers of color. Ryan kept his hand steady on the wheel, but his jaw was tight. Lily sat beside him, eyes fixed on the GPS tablet balanced on her knees. The signal had gone cold the moment they entered the building. Whoever was watching had shut it down remotely. Clean, professional, military-grade encryption. That meant one thing: the leak wasn't a foreign operative. It was someone inside. The realization settled over her like lead. She'd spent her career drawing lines between good and evil, between uniforms and threats. But lines blur when the enemy speaks your language, wears your insignia, shares your coffee in the morning. At the safe house, she spread the intel across the table: printouts, decoded transmissions, satellite logs. Ryan stood behind her, arms crossed, the weight of command written in every movement. "Whoever's feeding them knows our procedures," he said quietly. "They're using Navy relay nodes. Access that deep doesn't happen by accident." Lily nodded. "Someone's protecting them, someone high." "Any guesses?" "Not yet," she said, "but I'll find out." He watched her work for a moment, the way her hands moved with precision, her eyes scanning lines of code like they were written in a language only she understood. "You've changed," he said softly. She didn't look up. "So have you." He smiled faintly. "Fair." Hours passed. The rain outside turned to mist. A digital clock ticked quietly in the background. At 02:13 she froze. "There." Ryan leaned over her shoulder. On the screen, a string of encrypted metadata blinked, an origin tag embedded in the relay stream. She zoomed in, tracing the route. The code resolved into coordinates. He exhaled. "Norfolk." "The Naval Intelligence Hub," she confirmed. "Somebody inside the system's ghosting transmissions through our own network." Ryan's tone darkened. "They're hiding behind our uniforms." She looked at him then, the same look she'd worn in the mountains before she made her impossible decision. "Then we go find them." They flew east under cover of orders Ryan barely had to fake. Old connections opened doors faster than truth ever could. Norfolk greeted them with the sterile hum of bureaucracy, secure badges, concrete hallways, faces that smiled without warmth. Lily hated it immediately. They met with a liaison named Commander Ellis, sharp suit, smoother voice, eyes that measured everything. He listened to their briefing without blinking. "You're saying there's a domestic relay leak feeding insurgents. That's a serious accusation, Captain Scott." "It's not an accusation," Lily said evenly. "It's data." Ellis's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And you're certain your analysis is correct?" Ryan's voice cut through, calm but heavy. "We trust her work more than we trust your firewalls, Commander." Something flickered behind Ellis's professional calm, a shadow of irritation, or maybe fear. He nodded slowly. "I'll have my team look into it." Lily leaned forward. "No, you'll give me access to your signal registry. I'll look into it myself." For a long moment Ellis said nothing. Then, with the faintest smile, he gestured to his aide. "Get them clearance." As they walked out, Ryan murmured. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. "I noticed," Lily said. That night they worked from a secure lab deep under the facility, rows of servers humming, screens bathing them in pale light. Lily traced the data stream again, deeper this time, tunneling through layers of encryption until she hit a name. Her breath caught. CMDR, Alan Ellis. She stared at the monitor, her pulse pounding. Ryan leaned over, saw it, and his expression hardened. "He's the leak." She swallowed. "He's been selling intel for months, routing it through black contracts, laundering it through private channels. Every transmission we traced leads back here." Ryan's jaw clenched. "He set you up tonight, wanted to see how much we knew." She nodded slowly. "Which means he won't wait long to clean it up." As if on cue, the lights flickered. A security alert flashed across the screens. "System lockdown. Unauthorized access DETECTED." "Move," Ryan ordered. They grabbed their drives and bolted for the side exit just as the facility alarm screamed to life. Guards appeared at the far end of the corridor, not responding, waiting. Lily's heart hammered. "He's already spun this. We're the intruders now." Ryan pulled her toward the maintenance stairs. "Then we do what we always do, adapt." They burst through a service door into the night. Rain poured again, heavy and relentless. The city lights shimmered off wet pavement as they ducked into an alley, breath ragged, adrenaline replacing fatigue. "Where to?" she asked. Ryan's voice was steady despite the chaos. "There's an old contact at Langley, someone who still owes me favors. We get this data to him, we can expose Ellis before he erases us." "And if he gets there first?" Ryan looked at her, calm, resolute, the same expression he'd worn in that Afghan valley. "Then we make sure he doesn't." They drove through the night in an unmarked sedan, the stolen drive encrypted and tucked into Lily's jacket. She stared out the window as the highway blurred by, rain, headlights, her reflection. She could feel the moral weight pressing down again. Every time she thought she'd left the war behind, it found her in another shape. Ryan glanced at her. "You okay?" She laughed softly. "You ever get tired of asking that question?" "Never get tired of hearing you say yes." She smiled faintly, eyes still on the road. "Then let's pretend I did." He grinned. "Good enough for me." They reached Langley before dawn, the horizon just beginning to glow pale gold. Ryan's contact, a retired analyst named Briggs, met them at a side gate. He was older, gray hair, wary eyes. "You two just made my morning more interesting," he said, ushering them inside. Lily handed him the drive. "It's all there, evidence of a domestic leak feeding insurgent networks." Briggs plugged it into a secure terminal, scanning the files. His expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief to quiet anger. "Son of a," he muttered. "You're right, this goes deep. Ellis isn't alone. There are others, contractors, mid-level intel officers, people moving data for profit, a ghost market. Ryan crossed his arms. Can you prove it? Not yet, Briggs said. But this is enough to start. We'll lock it down, backtrace every node. It's going to burn a lot of reputations. Lily exhaled. Good, let it burn. But even as she said it, she felt the unease settling in. Exposure came with collateral damage. Careers, lives, people she'd worked beside for years. Ryan saw the hesitation in her eyes. You're doing the right thing, Lily. Then why doesn't it feel like it? He stepped closer, his voice low. Because right never feels clean, it just feels necessary. She nodded slowly, remembering the words she'd told herself in the desert. Necessary isn't always right, but sometimes it's the only way home. By midday, the investigation had begun. Briggs moved fast, calling in secure channels, feeding redacted data up the chain before Ellis could intervene. But the system had a way of protecting itself. By evening, the news broke internally. Ellis was dead. Car accident, no witnesses. Lily stared at the report on the screen, her hands cold. Ryan whispered, they silenced him. And scrubbed everything he could have named, she added. Someone higher pulled the plug. He met her gaze. Then this isn't over. She closed the laptop slowly. No, but maybe it never will be. They stood there for a long moment, the hum of servers filling the silence. Finally, Ryan said quietly, you ever wonder if we're the ghosts now? Just pieces left behind from things no one wants to remember. She looked at him, the man she'd once rescued, now standing beside her in another kind of battlefield. Maybe, she said, but ghosts still get to choose what they haunt. He smiled faintly. Then what do we choose? Lily thought about it, then stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. We choose to keep fighting, just not the same war. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of earth and electricity, that fragile calm that comes before dawn. As they walked out of the building, she felt it again, that pull between weariness and purpose, between the world she wanted to leave and the one that wouldn't let her go. The war had changed shape, the enemies had changed uniforms. But courage, she realized, never needed a battlefield. Sometimes, it just needed someone willing to stand up in the quiet and say enough. How do you fight an enemy made of silence? The official story hit the news feeds within hours. Navy commander killed in vehicle accident on Interstate 64. Mechanical failure, no foul play suspected. Case closed. Inside the small room at Langley, the glow of the monitor dimmed to black. Lily Scott stared at her reflection in the dark glass and felt the familiar chill of truth dying behind paperwork. Ryan stood beside her, arms folded, the weight of understanding in his eyes. They buried it. She nodded slowly, just like they've buried everything that doesn't fit the story. Briggs can't push it any higher, he said. He's already been told to stand down. Classified oversight, national security, the usual words. Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. Translation, they'd rather protect a system than admit it's bleeding. He didn't answer, he didn't have to. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low, the air heavy with unfinished business. She turned from the window. So what now? We just pretend it never happened. Ryan looked at her, calm but resolute. We survive, we keep the proof, we wait for the right moment. She laughed softly, bitterly. You sound like me a year ago. He smiled. Guess we've traded places. The fatigue hit her suddenly, not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that lives in the bones. She sank into the nearest chair, elbows on her knees, hands clasped. I thought saving you would be the end of it, she said quietly. Like one clean line between before and after, but there's no after, is there? There's just the next thing you have to fix. Ryan crouched beside her, his voice low. You can't fix everything, Lily. Then why does it feel like I'm supposed to? He reached for her hand, hesitated, then didn't pull back. Because that's who you are. She looked at him, the quiet steadiness in his eyes. The man who'd once been the mission, and was now the reason she still had one. Maybe it's time that changes, she said. 2 weeks later, Washington moved on again. The Ellis case disappeared into classified archives, sealed under the same phrase that had buried 100 other secrets: national interest. Lily returned to her office overlooking the river. From the outside, she looked the same, uniform pressed, reports precise. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The phone on her desk rang 3 times before she answered. Captain Scott. Lily. Ryan's voice carried across the line, steady as always. They reassigned me, he said. Overseas advisory, train and assist program. She felt her stomach tighten. You accepted. They didn't ask. Orders came down this morning. Silence, then she asked the question she didn't want answered. Zangle. Near enough. She closed her eyes. They're sending you back to the same place. It's just an advisory post, he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. Nothing kinetic. They just want a familiar face in the region. She exhaled slowly, her pulse hammering in her throat. Ryan, you know it's not that simple. Those people still have your name. I know, he said softly. That's why I called. I wanted you to hear it from me. When do you leave? 48 hours. She didn't respond for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was calm, measured the way she sounded when she was breaking inside. Be careful. He hesitated. Come with me. Her breath caught. Ryan. You know that terrain better than anyone. You'd be my intel liaison. Officially, it's by the book. And unofficially. He smiled, though she couldn't see it. Unofficially, I don't trust anyone else to watch my back. She leaned back in her chair, staring out at the water. The sunlight flickered across the surface like Morse code, some message she couldn't quite read. For months, she'd wanted peace. Now, faced with it, she realized she didn't know what peace looked like without purpose. I'll think about it, she said quietly. The flight back into the desert felt like déjà vu, the same endless sky, the same hum of engines, the same unspoken tension between them. When they landed, the heat hit like a wall. Zangle was the same and not the same, rebuilt roads, new compounds, another generation of soldiers repeating the old mistakes. Lily stepped onto the tarmac and felt memory flood her veins. Every sight, every sound, every heartbeat of that place was imprinted in her. Ryan joined her, adjusting his pack. Feels like yesterday. Feels like a lifetime, she corrected. They spent the first days meeting local units, inspecting security protocols, pretending this was just another rotation. But both of them knew better. They could feel the eyes. At night, from the edge of the camp, she'd see the mountains in silhouette, the same ones she'd crossed alone once upon a time. They looked almost peaceful in the moonlight, but she knew what kind of ghosts slept out there. One evening, as they walked the perimeter, Ryan said quietly, "You didn't have to come." She looked at him. Maybe I did. Why? Because unfinished stories have a way of finding me. He smiled. Then maybe we finish this one together. The attack came 3 nights later. It wasn't big, not by war's standards, but it was precise. A small team slipped through the outer fence during a sandstorm, targeting the command tents. Professionals. Lily woke to the sound of explosions. By the time she grabbed her rifle, the camp was chaos, shouting, smoke, tracer fire cutting through the storm. Ryan was already outside, barking orders, moving through the haze like he'd never left. South perimeter, he shouted. They're breaching the line. She followed, heart pounding, visibility near zero. The world had turned to noise and dust. Through the storm, a figure emerged, rifle raised. Too close. Lily fired first. The man dropped. Then she saw the patch on his sleeve. an emblem she recognized from the data Ellis had hidden. It wasn't insurgents. It was contractors. Her mind raced. Private military stateside funding, the same ghost network Ellis had covered for. This wasn't revenge, it was cleanup. She sprinted toward Ryan. They're not locals, they're hired guns. He turned, eyes narrowing. Then someone back home sent them. A round cracked past them, hitting the dirt inches from his feet. They dove behind a vehicle, returning fire. Minutes stretched into hours, then silence. The wind shifted, clearing the air, revealing the aftermath. The attackers were gone, retreated, just enough damage to send a message. Lily leaned against the wreckage, breath ragged. This isn't over. Ryan nodded, wiping dust from his face. No, it's just a reminder they still own the story. She stared at the horizon. Then maybe it's time we write our own. The following morning, they sat in the quiet of the ops tent. The camp was rebuilding around them, the world pretending normal again. Ryan poured her a cup of coffee, handed it over without a word. It tasted like mud, but it was warm. He said softly, "When this is over, I'm done, for real this time." She looked up. "You mean it?" "Yeah, no more deployments, no more wars that belong to other people, just life." She smiled faintly. "Do you even remember what that looks like?" He met her eyes. "Not yet, but I want to find out, with you if you'll let me." Her throat tightened. "Ryan." "Don't answer now," he said. "Just think about it. Because the only thing I'm sure of anymore is that peace isn't a place, it's a person." She didn't speak. She couldn't. She just reached across the table and took his hand, a simple gesture, quiet, human, real. For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. There was only the hum of the generators and the warmth of another heartbeat close enough to feel. That night, Lily stood alone at the edge of the camp, the desert stretching out before her. The stars were impossibly bright, the same sky she'd seen the night she crossed those mountains alone. She thought about how far she'd come, and how far she still had to go. There was a kind of peace in that realization, not the peace of ending, but of understanding. Behind her she heard footsteps. Ryan. He stopped beside her, looking out at the same endless horizon. "What now?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "Now we stop running." They stood there in silence, the wind carrying the scent of dust and diesel, the faint echo of a war that refused to end but no longer owned them. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply stands side by side and refuses to yield. How do you end a war that no one admits ever started? 3 weeks after the attack, the reports were still under review. No acknowledgement, no names, no trace of who sent the contractors or who funded them. The investigation faded before it ever began. But Lily Scott wasn't fatting with it. She spent her nights in the comms tent, going through encrypted files, cross-checking serial numbers on recovered weapons. Each piece led her closer to a truth the world didn't want found. And one night she found it. A serial chain, manufacturer logs, payment records rerouted through a front company in Virginia, the same network Ellis had used before his accident. Different name this time, same fingerprints. A ghost with a new face. Ryan found her staring at the screen, jaw tight. "What did you find?" "Proof," she said quietly, "and something worse." He leaned closer. The final document wasn't a transaction. It was a list. Names, coordinates, target profiles. And at the bottom, Ryan Harrison. Her voice barely held. "They're still coming for you." He studied the screen, his expression unreadable. "Then it's time to make sure they never try again." The next morning, Lily met with the base commander, a man who measured every word, every movement. She placed the printed dossier on his desk. "These aren't isolated attacks, they're cleaning up witnesses." He didn't touch the file. "That's a serious allegation, Captain." It's not an allegation, it's evidence. He exhaled. And what do you expect me to do? Accuse a chain of command that's 3 layers above me. You'll be shut down before you finish your sentence. She leaned forward. Then at least try. He looked at her for a long time, then said softly, "You've already done your duty, Captain. Don't die trying to do it twice." She left without a word. Outside, the sun was merciless, the kind that bleaches everything to bone. She felt the heat press against her skin, and for a moment she understood what futility really felt like. Then Ryan was there, watching her, waiting. She didn't speak, just handed him a drive. The commander won't act, but this gets out, the world will have to. He frowned. Lily, if you leak that, you're finished. Your career, your clearance, everything. She looked him straight in the eye. Maybe that's what it takes. He shook his head slowly. You're better than them. Don't burn yourself down to prove their fire exists. Maybe that's what soldiers do, she said softly. We walk through fire so someone else doesn't have to. That night, she prepared the transmission. A secure upload, Deadman encryption, multiple mirrors around the world. It would go live in 48 hours, unless she stopped it. She stared at the countdown, feeling the weight of every decision she'd ever made pressing down on her chest. Ryan entered quietly, closing the tent flap behind him. You sure about this? No, she said honestly, but I've been sure before and it cost too much. He nodded slowly, then after a long pause said, if this goes out, they'll come for both of us. She met his gaze, then they'll have to find us first. He smiled faintly, that calm, steady look that had once driven her insane and now anchored her completely. Guess it's fitting. You saved me once. Now it's my turn to stand with you. Not behind me. Never behind you, he said, always beside. The storm hit just after midnight. Not sand this time, rain. Heavy, rare, almost cleansing. The desert smelled alive again, and the thunder rolled across the mountains like distant artillery. They stood outside the tent, rain running down their faces, the hum of generators lost under the sound of the sky breaking open. She whispered, do you ever think maybe it was never about winning? He looked at her, rain in his hair, eyes steady. Then what was it about? Enduring, she said, so that when the next storm comes, someone else knows how to survive it. He didn't reply, he didn't need to. Because some truths don't need to be spoken, they just need to be shared in silence. When dawn came, the world was washed clean. Lily walked to the highest ridge above the base, the same ridge where, years ago, she'd stood alone with a broken radio and a dying hope. Now she wasn't alone. Ryan climbed up beside her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling in the cold morning air. He handed her one. So what happens when that timer hits 0? She watched the horizon where the first rays of sun touched the desert. The truth gets free. After that, maybe the world changes, maybe it doesn't. He smiled faintly, and us. She turned toward him. We stopped being ghosts. He studied her for a long time, the woman who'd walked into hell for him, who'd faced down silence and survived. You really think it's that easy? She smiled, small, sad, real. No, but I think it's worth trying. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small metal badge, dented, scorched, almost unrecognizable. His old seal insignia. He pressed it into her hand. You carried me out of that place when I couldn't stand. You carried the mission when no one believed you. Maybe it's time you carried something lighter. She turned the badge over in her palm, feeling the weight of all it meant: duty, loss, love, survival. I don't know how to stop carrying things, she said softly. Then start with this, he said. Don't carry it because it hurt. Carry it because you survived. For a moment, the world went quiet. Just the wind. Just 2 people who'd seen too much and still found a way to believe in something human. That evening, the transmission completed. Files duplicated, distributed, too many mirrors to erase. The truth was no longer theirs to guard or to hide. By the time Command realized what had happened, Lily and Ryan were gone. No flight plan, no base record, no trace. Just an empty tent and a single note on her desk. Sometimes the only way to save the uniform is to walk away from it. The message spread quietly through the ranks, not official, not confirmed. But it became a story whispered in barracks and break rooms, retold in fragments. About the woman who walked into enemy lines to bring a man home. About how they found each other again in a war that wouldn't end. And about how, when silence tried to bury the truth, she made sure the world heard it anyway. Months later, somewhere along the northern coast, a small cottage sat by the water. A woman stood on the porch at dawn, watching the waves crash against the rocks, coffee in her hand, scars on her skin. She still woke up sometimes expecting alarms, expecting orders, expecting war. But the only sound now was the sea. Inside, a man slept, the same one she, once carried through a storm of bullets, now breathing softly beside an open window. Peace wasn't what she thought it would be. It wasn't loud or grand or final. It was small, quiet, earned. She smiled, looking out at the horizon. Somewhere out there, people still fought, still believed, still broke themselves on causes that might never love them back. But for now, she'd done enough. She whispered into the wind, not for anyone to hear, but just to say it out loud. I made it. And for the first time in years, she believed it. Because sometimes the bravest act isn't defiance. It's release. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply breathes and keeps walking forward. And sometimes, the truest warriors are the ones who learn that peace isn't the absence of battle. It's the grace to stop fighting when you finally can.